How about if I just start at the beginning? you could be honest.
Because you know what? They have the sweat equity that went into that memory that they're making with their friends and family. And that's what's important with this, and that's what the I Am Real World's about.
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the best things about a spring food plot is you get a second chance if it fails.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins, brought to you by buyafarm.com, your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. By tapping into Don's years of experience, dedication, and commitment, Chasing Giants focuses on the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails. Now, here is Don and co-host Terry Peer.
Well, welcome everybody to Chasing Giants, episode 17. I'm sitting in Don's shed with a live studio audience, and this is a little weird.
We got quite a crowd around us tonight, Terry.
They've been taunting us for about the last half hour about how they're going to stump us, and I'm not sure about this.
We'll see how many of them have the guts to get up and ask a question, though.
So for the listeners out there, we're sitting here with a bunch of tables set up. I'm getting a lot of weird grins from people. And we got a microphone set up, so tonight's platform is a little bit different. They're going to get up in front of everybody and introduce themselves. I guess if they don't want to, they don't have to, but they're going to ask us a question and put us on the spot.
Yep.
And I don't know how this is going to go. We're gonna see.
We're going to find out. And just so everybody listening knows, we're at my first whitetail master course of the spring here on my home farm. We got about, approximately 20 guys here this evening. Tomorrow we'll be doing the class and touring the farm, as well as another farm a few miles away. So tonight we're doing this live recording of the podcast, and hopefully people have got some questions.
Yep. And I do have to note that we do have the infamous Wes Delks in the audience today.
Yeah, he became really famous after that last podcast.
I will admit, now we got to clarify this. We poke a lot of fun at him a lot of times, and it all started with the joke about us putting him on a billboard on I-70 just east of Terre Haute. Oh. And he still doesn't believe me that it's actually there.
Not many people know he's an underwear model.
So, but yeah, we poked a little fun about his tree saddle, but he did quickly learn when we hooked him up with a Lone Wolf tree stand last year that went by the wayside really quick, and he shot. Hey, at the end of the day, he shot a bigger buck than both of us.
That's exactly where I was going, but he wasn't in a tree saddle when he did it. He was in a Lone Wolf tree stand.
So I guess he would take us picking at him every year if he shoots a bigger buck than we do every year. He's shaking his head. He says no problem.
Let's put him on the spot and make him ask the first question.
So Wes, you get the first question to try to stump us here. He's walking up to the microphone. Do a quick sound check there for me, buddy.
Check.
There he is. In all of his glory. Yeah, you're good.
So, Don, if I'm looking for a property to buy, just from an aerial perspective, what characteristics from an aerial perspective do you look for an ideal property to purchase? And you can talk about leasing too, purchase or lease.
Great question. I like a property that's isolated. It sits by itself rather than connects to a lot of other cover. I think when it connects to other pieces of cover, you're kind of at the mercy of your neighbors, especially if you've got neighbors that are a little bit unscrupulous and want to set the line, things like that. The deer can't recognize a property line, so what goes on right across the fence affects you a whole lot more. Now, if you've got a property that sits almost like an island, in a sea of ag or whatever, it seems to be a whole lot better. You can do a whole lot more with it. You can grow bucks and move them on to older age classes a whole lot easier. So that's the first thing I look for. The other thing is access. Where's your access points and what direction do you get to access that property? If your access is from the north, for example, which is good for south winds, but it's not so good for north winds. Or if your only access is from the west, that's not real good for westerly winds. So multiple access points are great, but if you've only got one access, which direction it's from is pretty important. Also want to see a good mixture of both open fields and wooded or brushy cover. 50-50 mix is ideal, but the big thing is that it sets out by itself, isolated away from other cover.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question.
Yep.
I mean, we've talked about it on a couple past episodes that even I used to look at a property and say, "Oh, look at all the connecting woods."
Right.
You know, and that connecting woods might be 9 hunters hunting within 100 yards of the property line.
I've always had my best success on properties that are isolated. I know I got a couple friends here that have helped me drag out more than one buck, and they'll tell you that when they come to help me drag out a buck, it's usually an isolated patch. It might be just a draw or a fence row out in the middle of nowhere. It's usually not a big tract that's connected to a lot of other cover.
All right, that's a good question. Who's got another one? Somebody's got to make their way up there.
Yeah. We'll start calling out names if somebody don't step up to the
yeah, we need an on deck circle here.
Yeah, I'm Jason Berner. I live up in northwest Indiana, but you kind of expanding on the access point. How much do you think the deer really care about vehicles driving up and down fields? I know some places I hunt, to get in, you really got to drive halfway through the field to get in there. And I mean, in the mornings, nighttime, you see them running, you're spooking them, you know you're getting in and out of there, but do you think that really impacts them long term, or is that more just a short term impact?
Well, I can tell you for absolute certain, I can think of 2 examples real quick here where deer on 2 different properties have learned to recognize my truck sitting along a road. And if the truck's moving down the road, it doesn't seem to bother them, but a parked vehicle on the road, they come out of the woods and they can look across the field. It's almost like they've connected the dots, and they know when that truck's there, I'm there, and I'm somewhere I shouldn't be. So I think the traffic itself, the moving vehicle, I mean, you talk to a farmer, and if he's on a tractor, and he'll see deer, at close range as he's working a field or whatever, but stop that tractor or stop that combine and see how tight that deer sits, because he gets up and busts out of there. So I think the moving traffic is not near as big a deal as where you park your vehicle. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
well, we even saw it on this property with your 4-wheeler.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why you actually went and looked for the Quiet Cat to begin with, is so they would. I mean, we would set. You guys will see this blind tomorrow when we walk around the farm. These deer, if they came out on one side of us, they'd look straight over. And if his 4-wheeler was there, they'd go right back in the switchgrass, or they'd blow out over the field. They'll
flare their tails and start blowing and snorting and stomping at that 4-wheeler, and, I mean, it's over. I mean, they're telling every deer on the property that something's up. So, it works with ATVs just as well as it does with trucks or other vehicles.
So just one more question on top of that. Is it better – I've always heard the theory that it's better to blow a deer out with a truck or a moving vehicle than it is walking out through a field. And, the year Kyle Harmon shot Kick It In Son, I believe, he was having, I think, his grandpa come in and blow the deer out with a truck to pick him up to take him out instead of him walking out and blowing him out. So
yep,
I think he documented that story pretty well on Team Radical's page.
Well, several years ago when I shot my biggest buck, the 214, I had a friend drive me in a truck, and we actually put a stand up. We left the truck running, the doors open, the radio as loud as it goes. We put this stand up. He drove away and left me there. 2 hours later, this 214-inch buck's 20 yards from me. So if they can locate where you're at, a lot of times if they feel safe, they'll hold tight. I mean, you really got to step on their tail to bust them out of there most of the time. But a human on foot is a whole lot more pressure than a vehicle is.
Yeah, Patrick and I were talking this morning coming up about the Quiet Cat. You said that you've actually seen deer stay in the field as you've driven by on that, just because it's a moving object that I don't know if it's that they haven't learned it yet or what the deal is with it.
I think that's what it is. They look at you like, what in the world is this thing? They see a guy riding a bicycle across a cornfield, and they almost don't know what it is. They don't spook like they would on an ATV. I know that.
Yeah. Good question.
Yep.
Next up, somebody's got to go. Here we got one.
I'm Mike.
Hi, Mike.
A new property owner, and one of the things that concerned me the most was not messing the property up. There's tons of information about what people think you should do, tons of info about what people think you should do, but not a lot about mistakes that could be made. And that was my biggest concern.
Where do I start? That's a good one. In fact, I was just saying earlier to someone that, there is so much misinformation on the internet. It's almost, the internet is the misinformation highway. It's not the information highway, it's the misinformation highway. And it seems like that somebody puts something out there and people just buy into it and then they promote it. And before you know it, you've got the entire deer hunting community believing something that's not accurate whatsoever. And I actually just wrote a blog about it. The last blog I posted probably in the last week. The best advice I can give you is take a look at who's offering your advice or the advice you're reading, and has that person actually accomplished what you're setting out to accomplish? There's a lot of guys that have never shot a mature buck that are giving information on how to, and charging people for the information on how to do it. Well, I mean, you wouldn't take your car and let somebody work on the brakes to somebody that's never worked on car brakes before. You wouldn't let somebody perform surgery, a doctor perform surgery on you if he's never done it before. But yet people will spend thousands of dollars for somebody to tell them how to deer hunt when the person they're paying has never done it successfully. So, I just encourage you, and I'm not going to get into slamming anybody in particular or even endorsing anybody in particular, but there's a lot of good, knowledgeable authors and figures in the hunting industry that are putting out good information, but there's also plenty of them that the information is not so good. So I would look at the source as much as I would the information. If it's somebody that's been successful, then their information has been validated.
I mean, there's people in this industry that own food plot companies that aren't hunters. There's businesses that are out there to make money and people out there to make money, and that's at any cost. So you have to align whatever you're trying to look at purchasing or who you're trying to learn from is have they accomplished, like Don said, what I'm trying to do. So I heard a story this week about this lady who was trying to teach their daughter how to cook a roast, and they cut the ends off the roast. The young girl said, "Well, why do you cut the ends off the roast?" She goes, "I don't know. That's how my mom taught me to do it." So she was persistent like most kids and said, "Well, I want to know. Is it about seasoning or is it about cutting fat off or whatever?" So they got on the phone and called the girl's grandmother and says, "Why do you cut the ends of the roast off?" She said, "I don't know, but that's how my mother taught." And her great-grandmother was still alive, so they called her and said, "Well, why did you cut the end of the roast off?" She said, "To fit in the pot." So, I mean, we get in this habit of doing it because we've always done it or because somebody said to do it, but it's not for any good reason. Mm-hmm. It's just misinformation that somebody's put out there that now all of a sudden, because they're a keyboard, expert, that it's taken as gospel. You got to be really careful.
Yep. Absolutely. We got another guy coming to the mic.
Guy Antonacci from Connecticut. I've got a two-part question. The first would be, Don, you just came out to my farm a couple weeks ago, and we talked about putting up a couple of box blinds on a couple of the different parcels. How important is it going to be to, like, you hear all this talk about, oh, you got to brush your blind in, you can't see it from so far away, or this or that. How important is that going to be?
It's not important whatsoever, and you're going to see tomorrow some of the blinds on my place stand out like a sore thumb. But what is important is that they are put up well in advance of hunting season so the deer get used to them. It's no different than an old piece of farm machinery or something that's set out there for years. The deer get used to it. So, I try to brush mine in more for entrance and
getting out of it so they don't see you.
Yep. But
one year, 3 years ago, I used a hay bale blind, and instead of dropping the windows and showing black, I put the windows in backwards so that it was always black, so it always looked the same. and we sell the hay off our farm, and the farmer got really mad because I went around with black paint and painted windows on every single round bale in the field that year. So they would all look the same. I don't know if it made any difference or not, but he wasn't real happy I lined up his hay bales. But
then the other question was, we talked about logging different chunks of the woods for to make sanctuaries and stuff. You hear a lot of people talk about hinge cutting and the advantages to that. We did not talk about that. We were just talking about taking the trees, cutting them, taking the timber out, and leaving the tops. So why didn't we talk about that?
I'm not a big fan of hinge cutting. I think as land managers, we should be the best stewards we can be of the resource that we've been entrusted with for a period of time. We're going to be leaving, no matter who we are, we're not going to live forever. We're going to be leaving our properties to someone else down the road. Hinge cutting you keep the tree alive. I mean, if that tree is so worthless that you're going to hinge cut it, why not kill it and let a better tree either take its place or clear space for a better tree around it to grow faster? Hinge cutting just basically takes a worthless plant and keeps it alive. And even when you drop it, then you're taking even more ground space, after you hinge cut it. I would much rather, and we're going to see tomorrow what I've done in my sanctuary in the last week. I've probably spent 20 hours with a chainsaw just dropping trees. There's not a hinge cut tree back there. I think that's a much better approach. I've got 2 grandsons that are probably going to end up with this farm one day. So I was selectively cut the trees that are never going to have timber or wildlife value, while leaving the better trees, better branching structure, better species, the ones that are going to have timber value and also value for wildlife. I just think, we got a lot of guys running around out there with chainsaws every winter, hinge cutting their properties. And most of these guys don't know an oak from a maple, let alone a red oak from a white oak. So, I just think that we can be better stewards of the resource than what hinge cutting is.
So when I drop a tree, just completely cut it off and let it fall as structure versus hinge cut a tree. And it might stay alive and have foliage on it. Does that structure matter to a deer, whether it is a dead tree laying there or a living tree laying there? It doesn't make any difference on thermal cover in the winter because there's nothing growing. Mm-hmm. But it seems like to me I'd rather have a better protein and feed value food plot next to it and not rely. I mean, if the only benefit is so that it has green leaves so the deer can browse, I don't want them browsing in that thicket bedding area anyway. I want them coming out to a food plot where I can put a strategy together to kill it, right?
Exactly, and that's really the biggest benefit of hinge cutting is that tree stays alive, but it gets them branches down on the ground where the deer can browse the ends of them. And that's not totally a bad thing, but, I would rather drop that tree. And what that treetop will laying on the ground will do, it'll actually protect a new tree, a new seedling that grows up there. Amongst that treetop, it's protected from browsing deer. There's areas of the country where white oaks are basically becoming almost extinct because the deer, they're so slow to grow as seedlings that the deer are browsing them off and they don't have a chance to get established. And that's where leaving these treetops and these fallen trees on the ground, a white oak seedling can start amongst that treetop, and by the time it comes out of that top and that top's deteriorated, well, it's already above the browse level where the deer can reach it.
But if it's me, I don't want food choices in the bedding area.
Oh, I agree.
I want them coming somewhere else where I got a shot at them instead of being in there, right?
And the thing of it is, when you're going in and doing these cuts, you want as much sunlight to hit the ground. It's that second growth or, that regeneration that provides the thick bedding cover. And if you hinge cut a tree, well, it's still shading the ground under that fallen tree, and I want the sunlight to hit the ground.
Yeah, and this whole plan that they're going to see tomorrow when we walk around the property, that started in your head when we shed hunted that last year after a master class. Everybody left, and we had a few of us here, and we needed to burn one of the switchgrass fields, and then we shed hunted it after church, I think, on Sunday, and you walked in there, and you were just you were almost sick about how open it was, that there was not any structure. And I think you made up your mind that day.
I did, and there was a lot of deer that had wintered in there, and they had browsed everything within reach, and it was just a really distinct browse line.
You could see a long way inside that woods.
You could see clear through it, and I made up my mind that when the next winter rolled around, I was going to get in there and drop a bunch of those trees and create some more ground cover. And the fallen tree, even when it's dead, is good bedding structure. The deer will relate to it and bed right up against those fallen treetops.
And the other wildlife too, not just the deer. Yep. All right. Everybody's moving all at once, fighting over the microphone. This is going to be a good one.
We've got a legend coming to the mic. Gentlemen,
There should be.
This man is my mentor.
Infamous.
Step up a little bit closer. Step up a little bit closer so they can hear you.
I'm Alan Foster. My question is, Don, with all your consultations all over the country this year, last year, in the past, what has that impressed upon you, the differences you see in terrain and cover and how people take care of stuff and just the cool things that you've noticed from doing all your traveling that you wouldn't have if you just stayed here all the time?
I think the biggest thing I take away is how adaptable the whitetail is. I was just at Guy's property, actually 2 properties, one in Massachusetts, one in Connecticut. I was in New York. I've been to Iowa, Kansas, and the terrain varies some, but those deer are so adaptable. It doesn't matter where you're at. There's going to be whitetails there. You can be in the middle of the city even, and if there's enough cover, there's going to be some whitetails there. So that's probably one of the bigger things. The other thing that's really interesting to me is the people that I get to meet, because the whitetail passion just seems to have gripped a wide variety of different people. And that's, the best thing that I've said this before, but the best thing that whitetail deer ever did for me was the people that I've met because of deer hunting. Just great people everywhere I go. They seem to roll out the red carpet and treat me like a king, and just real appreciative of that. And it's the people more than anything that I really appreciate about deer hunting, that the people it's brought into my life.
What's the oddest thing you've seen this year so far?
Well, I might have to think about that a little bit. It might be on Guy's property. We came across this old shack, I guess, for a lack of a better word, that I actually put it on my social media.
Oh, the fireplace.
Yeah, this building was no more than about 8 foot wide by maybe 10 or 12 at the most feet long, and at one end it had this brick fireplace that went clear to the ground. I mean, it was like a fireplace that would heat a building the size that we're in here, and it's in this little bitty room. And then on the other side of that same cabin was this bed. It wasn't even a twin-size bed. It was a small bed, and it was really neat to see that. I wish them walls could talk, because I'd like to hear the stories of what went on in that old shack out in the middle of the woods.
I got to think that the one that I've seen was the stand in the TV tower in Michigan.
That was pretty interesting too. That was back in December.
Everybody's laughing. Everybody must have saw it on your Instagram page.
Yeah. Back in December, I went on a consulting trip to Michigan, and was at several properties there, and there was one particular property where the guy right behind his barn, he had these TV towers that were all bolted together, and this thing was way up in the air. I'm talking way up there, and at the top of it, the guy's got he's got a tree stand attached to this thing. And I'm like, good grief, do you ever get up there? And he's like, yeah, I go up there and I can watch my whole farm. And I said, do you have any idea how high it is? He says, yeah, 68 feet. He'd actually measured it. 68 feet in the air on this TV.
With no harness.
With no harness. This guy gets up there and sits. It's like, good grief. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
Or one of them.
I don't know that I've seen anything like that before.
Yeah. I had no doubt he could see his whole farm and probably the whole county from 68 feet in the air.
All right, let's take one more question. Somebody ask a quick question here before we go to the Biofarm segment. Who's got one? Here we go.
Hi, my name is Clayton. I'm from about an hour and a half south of here, actually. My question is, I think when you hunted Trump, I think you said you hunted that stand 9 times and didn't see a deer.
I hunted that property 9 times. I had 3 different stands that were fairly close together, but they were basically for 3 different wind directions. But they were real. I mean, that area I hunted it 9 times before I ever saw Trump.
Okay. Did you know he was there by trail cameras?
That buck, I'd really put some effort in the year before. He had exploded the summer before and probably put on 30, 35 inches from what he had been the previous summer. And he became a buck I wanted to kill. I mean, when he got up to that 190 plus range. But I didn't have – I knew where he spent his summers because I would get his picture in velvet. I went back through my database of my trail camera pictures, and I had several pictures of him in previous summers. But I did not have a picture of him in hard horn, so I knew that he relocated about the time he shed velvet, but I had no idea where he relocated to. So that first fall, I was basically just putting cameras out anywhere, the surrounding where I knew he summered, just in hopes of putting pieces of the puzzle together to where he went. What I discovered, going back through the trail camera history, the year I shot him, he was 7.5, so I'd been watching him since he was 2.5. Never realized how big he was going to get, but I had that history to go back on. And, I knew that where he summered at, I figured out that he didn't leave there until those crops were harvested on that one particular property. So I knew that my best chance to kill him was there before the crops were harvested. And that's why I just kept plugging away, because those crops were always the last crops in that area to be harvested. So, once they got harvested, it was like it was wide open. It was an ag prairie then. So I knew my best chance was to just keep plugging away right there until those crops were harvested. And at that point, I knew he was going to move on.
So you weren't going there on trail camera pictures necessarily? Like that he was going past your trail camera every...
Oh, no.
Okay.
No.
I get.
I just knew that, I got his picture at 8 different locations the previous hunting season. And I had permission on a handful of other properties. But I figured if I started jumping around to those other properties, I was probably always going to be one step behind that buck. And I did something that I almost never do, and that's I just kept pounding away at the same couple of stands.
Well, but there's more to the story, though. Because at the same time, he was waiting for the perfect condition here on this farm to hunt Smokey, right? So he Smokey was the homebody, and I just cringed when he would get on podcast and say, I got a 95% chance of killing this deer, and don't say that. But, he was waiting for just the right time to go in, and he only hunted that buck here twice, and they saw him both times, but he killed him on the second. So there was 3 or 4 of us on a group text that we would get text at night. Well, my 7th hunt without seeing an animal. He was over there, and how far was Trump going from? You got his picture within so many hours, like miles apart, where his range was going back and forth.
Yeah, that buck had absolutely no pattern. He just showed up, here, there, and everywhere at any hour of the day, or mainly at night. But at one point, I got 2 pictures. Those pictures were taken 17 hours apart, and they were 3 miles apart. So in 17 hours, he moved 3 miles, and I happened to get his picture at both spots. So who knows how much farther he went than where those cameras were. But he was just a total opposite of Smokey. I mean, he was just a wandering nomad that you never knew where he was going to show up at.
You kept hunting him at the same spot, even though after that?
I did, because I figured that if I jumped around from property to property, I was always going to be one step behind him, and I knew until those crops were harvested on that one farm that he was going to be spending some time there. And
you did get his cell phone picture when you were heading to the taxidermist with Smokey, though, in the daylight.
So then I shot Smokey on October 15th. 2 days later, on the 17th, I was taking Smokey to the taxidermist in the afternoon, evening. I mean, it was still daylight. And I was right on this road, right outside here, and I was down here at the tee, and my cell phone went off, and I had a cell camera over where Trump was at. And I pulled up the picture, and I couldn't believe it. There was Trump walking by my camera in daylight because he had hardly moved in daylight. So then the next day, my grandsons were here from Indiana, and I spent the day with them and didn't go hunting. But then the following day would have been the 19th. I went and I hunted one of those stands that the wind was right for. Where I got, it wasn't exactly where I got his picture. You know, I was 100 yards from the camera where the stand was. But my goal for the rest of the season was just to lay eyes on that buck. My goal wasn't even to kill him. It was like I didn't even think that was possible. I thought, you know, he's such a wandering nomad that it's going to be so hard to get a shot at him. My goal was just to lay eyes on him. And so I'm sitting in that stand, and he steps out of the standing corn. I'm thinking, well, first hunt since killing Smokey, I've already accomplished my goal for the rest of the season. And then he starts walking towards me, and I get a shot at him, and the rest is history, as they'd say. But so – is there more to your question? Or
I was just kind of curious, I guess, if you did have pictures of that buck on trail cameras, what's your threshold of you see a big buck having a certain pattern and you're trying to go in there or you're trying to learn his pattern? What's your threshold of going in there too much and bumping him versus not going in there enough and then his pattern has changed and then, you know, it's kind of a balance there.
And that's one of the topics we're going to cover in detail tomorrow. But you know what, I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of deer hunters make is they want to use their trail cameras to put together a pattern right then. They want to go check that camera and, okay, yesterday he was at this food plot at 4 o'clock, so I'm going to go sit on that food plot tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and there he's going to be. I'm using my trail cameras this season to kill bucks next season and the season after. The mature bucks that I've followed have an annual pattern. They're going to show up at the same places basically the same time each year. And I'm trying to pick out that pattern so that I'm a step ahead of him. I think most guys, when they're using their trail cameras, they're a step behind the bucks that they're after. And I try to use that previous year's knowledge gained from trail camera pictures to be a step ahead of that buck and be waiting on him. And that's what I was trying to do with Trump. I knew from all those years, the previous year's history, I knew that buck was going to stay there until them crops were gone. And so I just figured I would just keep pounding it out. And I knew he wandered a wide range too. So, but I reasoned that, you know, I didn't want to burn. Typically, you don't want to burn a stand out by overhunting it. But I reasoned that if he's not there, I'm not burning that stand out. I had good access.
And you weren't seeing any deer. It's not like you had 20 does out feeding you that had a chance of winning you. You were going in there and not seeing a squirrel.
Right.
So it's not like it was you would never have done that on this farm where you have a chance to see 20 deer in a food plot at night. You would have never hunted that, put that much pressure on that spot.
No, it would have burned this place out doing that. But, you know, it was one of them things that I took a different approach with Trump than I'd ever taken with any other buck, and it was all based on trail camera knowledge from previous years. The picture I got 2 days ahead of killing him was great, but I was going to be there no matter if I'd got that picture or not, because my whole season was based on laying eyes on Trump from that point forward, and that's where I was going to be to do it until those crops were harvested on that particular farm.
One of the projects I have going on that Don kind of helped me formulate the idea behind it is in Kentucky, one of my food plots, I have a nocturnal buck, but he comes into the food plot in different ways. And Don showed me how to go back and, you know, if you log your trail cameras pictures and you keep track of them, everybody has a different way to organize them. I've gone back the last 2 years that I have that picture and going back to the Weather Service websites and found out what the wind direction was when he accessed that food plot from the south or from the east, and then start charting that. So when I have those conditions, it's that year-to-year pattern I'm trying to learn, especially when you end up having a deer that's not betting on you. That's the tough part. You know, we don't know. You try to figure out where that radius or that circle, and in Trump's case it was miles away, in Smokey's case it was yards away probably from where he was. But that year-to-year data is very important, and you can go back and track that, you know, as long as you have the picture with that timestamp on it. That's what I'm in process right now. I got a spreadsheet that's so complicated it looks like a P&L statement from a big company, but it's all about wind direction and temperature based on that date and finding out where he was and what direction he was coming from.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I did with Trump that I'd never did with another buck was, I keep a database of my trail camera photos, but I created a spreadsheet, where I logged in every photo I got of him. From the time I first started getting his pictures as a 2-year-old, and I would do the obvious, the time, the date, the location, but I'd also note which direction he came from, which direction he left, any other bucks that were with him, like especially in the early season when he was in a bachelor group, and then I would go to the weather. I forget, it's Weather Underground, I think, is the one where
that's the one you have me using right now.
Yeah. So you can go there and you can plug the date and time in, and it'll tell you right at your location what the wind direction and velocity and everything was. And I logged all that. So then I could go back, and I'm actually doing it with another buck right now that I haven't killed yet. But, then you can go back and say, okay, it's October 5th. I'm ready to go hunting. Where was this buck previously on October 5th? I got a south wind today. Where was he previously around this date with the same conditions? And, that's how you can really utilize your trail cameras and take them to the next level, is when you're that detail oriented with the data that you're saving from those cameras.
Had you written a magazine article on that topic yet, or?
I haven't yet. I think I've got one coming out in North American Whitetail. They just assigned me some articles this week, and I'm pretty sure that was one of them.
One of them's going to be that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break and move on to the BuyAFarm.com property of the week.
BuyAFarm.com is your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. Now, here is Don Higgins with this week's featured property.
All right, this week's featured property is actually in Missouri. You listeners that have been following along, most of our properties have been in Illinois, but this one's actually in Missouri. It's 275 acres. It's located 3.6 miles south of Patton Junction, Missouri, along Route 51. This is actually an online auction. The bidding's going on right now, and it ends Tuesday, April 14th. So if you're interested, you might want to get on that. It's in 2 tracks. The first track is 260 acres. It's basically been managed as a cattle farm, but lots of opportunities to make this a hunting property as well. Lots of deer and turkeys on the place right now. So track 1's 260 acres. That'd be the main farm, and then there's another 15-acre track, which would make a great building site. I think it's on the other side of the road. But those are both up for online auction, which ends Tuesday, April 14th. If you're interested in viewing the properties, you can call agent Wayne Keller. Wayne's phone number is 618-407-1679. And Wayne would be glad to show you this property, and you can put your bid in on it.
So do they put bid in via phone? How does the auction process work in this case?
It's online bidding, so you can get on there and you can see what the current bid is, and then you can place your bid.
So both tracks are bid on separately, or if you win the first one, do you have the rights to the second one, or how's that work?
Well, there's actually a track 3, which track 3 is a combination of both track 1 and 2. Gotcha. So if you want both of them, you would bid on track 3, and if your bid is higher than the combination of 1 and 2, you would get it. So I'm
sure that BuyAFarm.com's website has all that information on it, or give Wayne a call. What was Wayne's number again?
Yeah, Wayne's number is 618-407-1679.
All right. Good deal. Go check it out at BuyAFarm.com. And Missouri property, so new state. I don't think we have not had a.
Nope, this
all
is our first one in
so far.
Missouri, yep.
So, all right, well, let's bounce back to. You got another question from the audience, or do we want to read one from that was submitted from one of the listeners here? Somebody got one, or you want to read one?
It doesn't look like anybody's got one.
Everybody's looking around here.
I'm going to read one real quick that was submitted online, but if somebody's got one, get up to the mic, and when I get done with this one, we'll answer your questions.
We'll be ready
well.
here.
Yeah, okay. The first question, submitted question, is from Ben Sansone from St. Louis, Missouri. Ben says, I hinge cut 2 ridged areas on my 130-acre property in the sanctuary area, probably about 3 acres of area in total. I made it look like a tornado went through there, kind of like Don has suggested. I now plan to stay out of there, but I have noticed it is very thick, almost too thick now to even walk through. I had a hard time walking out when I was done. How thick is too thick? Should I consider cutting corridors, as I have read that deer don't like it too thick because they want escape routes? Thank you, Ben. Great question, and you're going to see the answer tomorrow in the area that I just cut. I like to go in after just dropping these trees in any direction, whatever direction the tree's leaning, that's the way I drop it. But once I'm done with an area, I like to go in and create a trail from the outside edge, usually right by one of my tree stands, right into the heart of that property. Sometimes I'll just use my skid loader and I'll just push the fallen trees to the side and to create a trail that comes from the heart of this cut area right out past my tree stand. And what those deer will do, they'll follow that path and they'll get in there in the cover and they'll crawl up under those treetops and stuff just off the path and bed. But what do when it's time to get up in the afternoon? They stand up, they go out to the trail, and they walk right out past your stand. If you don't have access to a skid loader, then you can do the same thing with a chainsaw. Just, start your way in and just cut sections of trunk out just to make a path just big enough to walk through. And you don't have to mow it or anything. Those deer will find it easy enough. So Ben wants to know how thick is too thick. I don't think that I have never seen anything too thick, really, as far as an area that's been cut, as long as you give them these access routes in and out.
There are internet geniuses out there that even say that you can get a switchgrass field too thick, and
that's the biggest bunch of garbage I've ever seen or heard, and we're going to see it tomorrow
I was going to try to tee Don up on one and get him a little ruffled up, but yeah, there's actually people that say something's too thick that deer won't use it, and in your experience, that's not the case.
Yeah, I see that about switchgrass all the time online, and I'm going to show you tomorrow the thickest switchgrass I've ever seen. And it's going to have deer trails all through it, as well as beds.
So the bottom line is the trail that you're talking about making, whether it's in a timbered area or whatever, that's just to pattern the deer to go a specific direction close to where your stand is. Even if it's thick, they're going to find a way through it if they want to use it. Am I saying that right?
Exactly. And I talk about taking a good stand and making it a great stand. If you've got a stand on the edge of one of these cut areas, well, it might already be in a good spot, but you can make it even better by cutting that path into the heart of that down timber and giving those deer the easiest path. They'll follow it for sure, right past your stand.
Right. This summer we were checking trail cameras up here in Illinois together, and there's another way you can do that. Say we're not in timber. Mm-hmm. That it's real grown up thickets. Talk a little bit about how I can pattern or make that trail a specific direction or spot that it's within bow range.
We're going to see this tomorrow in the class as well, but I'll go into an area and with a little pump up garden sprayer and herbicide, and I'll just spray a path and kill the vegetation, and the deer will just follow it.
More than a mowed path. That's what we've found.
They will follow a mowed path, no doubt about it. However, what I've seen is there's a lot of mature bucks that won't. Does and young bucks, they'll follow those mowed paths all day long. If that's what you're happy shooting, by all means, get out there on your tractor and mow a path. But if you're wanting the big mature bucks, they want that cover right up against their side. They want to feel that brush against them, and you just use a garden sprayer and spray a little spot a foot wide and let the weeds grow up around it, but it's just enough.
They'll mow it down to where it's a trail.
They will.
That one picture that we took this summer, it was interstate going through. So
you can lead them right past your tree.
So we got Mr. Big Buck Killer Patrick Simpson himself up to the microphone. So I think he's going to sing us a song.
Do you think he brought his tree saddle from last week's episode?
He probably did.
I've never hunted out of a tree saddle, but I do have a question. I got to think about something a little earlier. And our part of Kentucky really got socked pretty hard with EHD. I was pretty fortunate not to lose any bucks or really any deer on my place because I kind of preventively maintenance that with y'all's mineral and stuff. But we haven't had much of a winter. And I was wondering, since we really haven't had any super cold weather, is EHD set up to really get socked hard this year if you're not prepared for it? Because I'm sure we're going to have a lot more insects that make it through the winter than normal.
You want to take that one, Terry? Or?
Well, I mean, you talked to the last week. Patrick asked the question about the crimper, and I think that's what got us on the tree saddle topic is the gimmicks.
Yep.
And you made a statement about go back and look at what the old farmers are doing or the farmers are doing. The farmers always talk about insects the following year after you don't have hard freezes are always bad. So how does that relate to a midge gnat and eggs and all of that stuff? You're more qualified on that, but I do know that even going back to my grandpa, he would always talk about the years after a winter that wasn't, you had more ticks, you had more other insects that you had to deal with crops the following year.
Well, I'm not sure how that's going to play out. You know, I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that. I do know, you know, that in a drier year, I think the weather next summer is probably more key than what it was this winter. You know, when it gets dry and the water sources dry up and deer
that mud's
concentrate.
That just damp mud from where everything dries up is what really kills us.
Right. That's where the midge gnat lays its eggs, and then you got limited water sources, so all the deer are coming to these limited water sources, and that dried mud around the edge is where those midge gnats are laying their eggs. And
the best thing we can have is an early frost to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. Different areas in Kentucky, I think Missouri and Iowa all got hit hard this year, and I mean, it's unfortunately there's a lot of bad data out there when it comes to, you know, we've talked about this a lot recently with the kind of misinterpretation of CWD versus EHD, and you know we got these blinders on right now trying to throw stabs at CWD when we're completely losing 80% of deer herd. You know, Southeast Indiana, our buddies Dave and JP, who didn't get to make it up this week, you know, I think they ended up probably losing 75% of the deer in their area. Mm-hmm. While some biologist is worried about what could happen, and in the meantime they're losing their entire herd. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah. EHD is definitely an issue, and it just seems to slowly be working its way farther and farther north. States that never had seen EHD a few years ago, Wisconsin, for example, Michigan, in the last 10 years or so, EHD has pushed up that far north, and it just seems to be going a little farther north all the time.
And we'll be publishing quite a bit more educational stuff on Expect Healthy Deer technology and you know, different ways to get consumption up for the states that allow it. And I got a test going on right now in Kentucky where we're doing some different things to try to just absolutely get the consumption rate up. Mm-hmm. But different ways to just get that additive in them to make them as healthy as possible, to give them a shot at surviving.
Right.
So good question. And it didn't spin into a tree saddle.
No, it didn't.
Love swing conversation.
Right.
Will Expect Healthy Deer technology cure the coronavirus?
If it does, we're millionaires, people.
We just reduced the price of it online. Yeah. We might need to rethink that. So, and all joking aside, we actually talked about making a little spoof media post on it, and I kind of shied away from it. It's a very serious topic for us, and a lot of lives and people's finances are being affected by it, so we don't want to make light of what's going on, but it does help EHD. I can't speak for coronavirus. So, all right, we need a couple more questions here before we wrap this show up. I haven't been put on the spot too awful bad. I was more worried than I should have been, I guess, but he's got a weird look on his face here.
Here comes the legend. I got to tell a story about this guy.
You got to get closer to the mic so everybody, all the listeners can hear us.
I was talking to a DNR guy on one of my deliveries and stuff not too long ago, and we were talking about what you said about losing your big bucks last spring and didn't know what happened to them. And he felt that they may have had some of the virus or EHD last spring because the conditions were similar last spring to what they normally are in the fall. Mm-hmm. Your bucks have already shed. Everybody's out of the woods after turkey season, so they decompose before anybody even knows they're gone. And he said he knows that over on the Wabash and over in those areas, they had a pretty good buck kill in the spring. So that may be, I mean, usually you hear of it in the fall, but if you turkey hunted the last couple of weeks here, the buffalo gnats and stuff, I mean, they popped out. They were horrible. So, and that's at the end of May, middle of May. So I just wondered if maybe that might have played into it. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that a possibility? I mean, I've always heard of that hitting in the fall, but he said the conditions last spring were very similar to what the fall normally is. Just a thought.
I don't know exactly what happened to the bucks last year, but I know that just me personally, I was watching 11 different bucks over 150 inches in about 5 or 6 counties around here. And these are bucks that were alive when they shed their antlers. And in the summer, when it came time to find them in velvet, I put my cameras out about the 1st of July when those racks are growed out enough that I can recognize individual bucks. I put my cameras out the 1st of July in areas where these bucks had always summered in the past, and they were gone. They never showed up again. They were just gone. And talking with others, in fact, this topic just came up earlier this week when I picked my 2 deer heads up from my taxidermist, Eric Kibler. He was saying the same thing, that, how weird it was that all these bucks that people were keeping an eye on from the previous season just disappeared and were not there last season. They weren't there in velvet last summer, so something happened between the time the bucks shed their antlers and, say, the 1st of July, where a lot of bigger mature bucks died. And I heard it. I wrote a blog on it last summer when I first noticed it, and that was the first I'd seen written about it. But it was like people were coming out of the woodwork telling me I seen the very same thing. I've got all 3 bucks that disappeared, or I got 5 bucks that disappeared, and I can't find them, and they've never showed back up, and they've always been there every year. Something happened last year, and it very well might have been a freak EHD outbreak in the spring or something.
Yeah, it could have been. One of the other things you've written about was potentially like a respiratory or pneumonia, because of how it was like cold and damp, and like cattle, that's the worst thing you can have. You either want it freezing or dry.
Right.
You can't just have constant. They get fluid buildup. So that was one of the other theories you've written about.
We'll probably never know the answer, but something definitely killed a lot of mature bucks about this time last year.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, we got time for 1 or 2 more. Come on. Yep, here he comes. He said he had like 15. I don't know why he sat down.
If you want, you can just stay at the mic.
We'll get into some of those tomorrow too. But you mentioned earlier some of your kind of ideal properties and stuff, different isolation, timber, grasslands, things like that. What about water when it comes into some of that? I know you've made some of your own artificial water sources, natural versus artificial. What are some pros and cons?
I feel that's one of those things that the internet is kind of ran with. In this part of the Midwest, I don't think water is that big of an issue. Now, I was in a place in Wisconsin a couple weeks ago, and I know a friend of mine, Art Heelan, up there, he just swears by these water holes. And what it is up there is it's really mountainous almost along the bluff country, not far from the Mississippi River. And these up on these tall ridges, all the water's in the bottom. The streams and such are in the bottoms. And up on these tall ridges, there is no water. And that's where they're putting the water holes and having really good luck hunting over these water holes up on the tops of these ridges. The areas that I've hunted, I don't think water's an issue. And I think on most properties, guys that are putting in water holes are probably doing more harm to their property than good. They're going in there. Human intrusion is the thing that ruins more properties than anything. And, they're doing all these little projects, and in the process, they're running more deer out than they're ever attracting to whatever their project may be. So I just don't see water as being a limiting factor for most of the Midwest.
I go back to your checkerboard analogy. And that's one of the things that kind of sets you apart different. His plan that he has for here, he knows that might not work in Wisconsin or in Texas, right? But when you look at the aerial view of your area and one box of your checkerboard is your property, what can I do on that box to differentiate it from every other square on that checkerboard? If that would be that's the only water that they would have on that entire checkerboard, that might be a different story.
Absolutely.
Right? But if there's creeks running everywhere through that whole checkerboard, what are you really accomplishing other than pushing deer out and making a mosquito factory? So I think you just have to step back for a second and say, how can I differentiate my square from everywhere else? I see a youngster in here. I bet he's got a question for Grandpa.
Hey, Walker.
Walker just walked in. Is he going to be shy, or will he ask Grandpa a question?
He's probably not going to ask any questions.
Oh, okay. Yep, go ahead. We got time.
We got another one coming up. I'll just throw out there that we've got guys coming in from 7 states to this course tomorrow. So hope you guys all left the coronavirus behind. And
fist bumps and elbow pads for everybody.
Yeah. Ray, Northeast Ohio. Why did you name Trump instead of Nancy Pelosi?
well, that's man. I'm glad you asked that question.
Wait. Before you answer that question, so what people don't know is he had a doe that, what do you call the condition where their tongue hangs way down? I forget what you call it, but this doe's tongue like literally hung out of her mouth, and he named her Hillary. And he was speaking at a charity event, and I'm like, you cannot get up in front of everybody and start talking about this. Yeah. But he did.
Actually, that's a true story. I was at Terry's church, and Terry says, I don't care what you say, but you cannot say Obama sucks. So,
he did. It was a calling from. It was a sign. The projector locked up, and he was in limbo, and he resorted to Obama sucks.
Yeah, I said, I came here with only one rule. Terry told me I cannot say Obama sucks, so I'm not going to say Obama sucks tonight. Well, now I just offended half our listeners, and I'll go back and answer your question.
That's all right.
Trump, in 2016, the year of the election year when Trump got elected, that summer before the election, when things were heating up between Trump and Hillary, I was a big Trump supporter. From the time that guy came down the escalator at Trump Towers, I was on board. We needed somebody besides a politician. And, I probably should have named him Hillary since I was wanting to kill him.
Jeez.
But no, I was just such a Trump fan,
PR nightmare for me.
My goal was actually to kill that buck on Election Day. Yeah, I killed the buck named Trump on the same day that Trump gets elected. That was my goal, but it didn't work out that way.
You all cannot even appreciate how much effort I had to put into Don giving him scripted statements that he was allowed to make on social media if he shot this buck. I mean, I pre-wrote them so he could just cut and paste it. It couldn't say, I just shot Trump. I'm like, you are going to have FBI people at your house if you post that. You have to say, I just shot a buck that I nicknamed Trump. Or, he had like 6 versions of what he was allowed to say and he didn't listen to any of it. But I was like, dude, you post that you just shot Trump, you're going to have an FBI agent sitting out front, knocking on your door. So
Terry came to us at Real World as our marketing director about, I don't know, how many years you've been with us?
I don't know, 5, I guess.
Probably 5 years ago. And he had his work cut out for him at the beginning. I mean, my politics were not secret whatsoever, were they, Terry? So,
that's all right, though.
Hey,
the beauty of a podcast is we can say what we want. We don't have to worry about it here.
That's right. But I just.
So he did have a doe named Hillary, that stuck her tongue out all the time. But yeah, that's the reason Trump got his name. But I was really, really concerned that he was going to make a Facebook post that says I just shot Trump and end up in jail somewhere. So
looks like we got another question from Mr. Tree Saddle himself, Wes Delks.
I don't know about that nickname, but
in a tree saddle with a ghillie suit. I want to see it tomorrow.
So, Don, you've been hunting for 40-plus years, and you've seen a lot of changes in that time. Looking at the next, speaking to younger hunters, 40 years from now, forecast, what changes do you see and what changes will it take to be successful, and what does somebody need to do differently to be a big buck killer with a career of hunting ahead of them?
Wow, that's a tough one. I have seen a lot of changes. There's so many things I carry to the field today that didn't even exist when I started. There's a lot of good changes and plenty that I don't like. And I'm not sure I like the direction the hunting industry's going. I think that it's going to get to the point where hunting is going to become a rich man's sport. Either you own land or you're paying high dollar for a lease, or you're not hunting. And then everybody else is going to get shoved off onto public land, and that's going to be so overhunted it's going to be a waste of time. And I think it's just going to become – the percentage of the population that hunts is just going to become smaller and smaller, and I'm not sure that I like that. It is what it is. When I started out, I was as poor as anybody. Deer hunting was my escape. All I needed to buy was a $5 license and a weapon that didn't even cost $100 at that time. And I was set, and I could go, around the neighborhood, and I could knock on 10 doors and get permission to hunt from 9 of those 10 people.
But there's 3 deer on those entire farms, though.
Well, that's
that was a
true.
little bit different back then, though.
But I think I would trade the deer numbers we have today for the freedom I had to go about anywhere I wanted back then. Today I'd knock on 10 doors, I'd get turned down 10 times, and probably 9 of them wouldn't be so nice. So
land's definitely the biggest thing.
It is, yeah.
The consumer behavior person in me will say that from a buying cycle or purchasing decision, our society now wants the quick fix. Not gimmick isn't the right word, but give me the one tool, whatever it costs, it's going to give me instant satisfaction. What's going to let me go buy something to automatically kill booners every year? I think that we've lost a little bit about, you want to be a trophy buck hunter, learn how to kill a deer first before you learn how to kill, a 200-inch buck. These people are starting to get into our sport and going straight to what Don's doing, and it's impossible. But they think that they're going to do it because they go and buy some gimmick product that's going to align all the stars correctly. And they may do it once, but they're not going to consistently do it. But as time goes on, even in my career, I've seen to where our hunters want to buy the one bow or the one thing that's going to allow them to kill a monster buck, and it's a lot of learning. I think it's more knowledge than anything.
Well, I was blessed to grow up in the time when I did. I'll tell a little story about a guy that's sitting here tonight that I'm sure he's not even going to say anything to brag about himself, but Alan Foster asked a couple of questions this evening at the mic. I met him when I was about an 18-year-old kid, and he was older than me, and he was doing what I dreamed of doing. He was shooting big bucks on a consistent basis, and so that first summer when I met him, I spent every break. We worked at the same place, so when I would get a break on the job, I'd run and talk to Al, and his stories or whatever, they always had a strong ethical overtone, if you will. He's one of the most ethical sportsmen I ever met. He was so ethical. I'm talking 40 years ago, or almost 40 years ago. He was so ethical that he would not even use doe and heat scent because he thought that was taking advantage of a buck's number one defense. he gave up hunting a few years ago. I mean, he would probably have a fit today with, these scent elimination products and things. I mean, here's a guy that would refuse to even use a deer scent. And, I was just blessed to grow up in a time and to have people like Al come into my life and still, strong hunting ethics. And I think that's what's missing today. And I think 40 years from now, it'll probably be even worse. So, I don't know what the next 40 years brings. I'm kind of a little bit afraid of what it brings, but buy land. If you want to hunt in the future, you need to buy some land.
Well, the industry overall is shrinking. The number of incoming hunters is down, but it's a lot of that. I think is what you said. I think it's access to property is the biggest thing.
Right.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up. Do you got anything else to say?
No, I don't. I see pizza coming in the back door and about 20 hungry guys here. We better wrap it up.
All right. Well, let's sign off from Don's master class. We got a full day ahead of us tomorrow. Going and touring. How many properties are we going to tomorrow?
We're just going to look at 2 tomorrow.
Going to 2 different ones tomorrow. So why don't you take us out?
All right. We want to thank our sponsors: BioFarm, 360 Hunting Blinds, Quiet Cat, Real World Wildlife Products, Vortex, Lone Wolf, and Matthews.
We'll see you in a couple weeks at episode 18.